Thank you for having me speak about biofortification. I want to put on this first slide. I'm not sure when this picture was taken, but it was when I came back in July. I noticed that this picture was in the introductory video of Circa. And so Glenn and I have known each other, I think we met around 1996 when we were first trying to start the idea of biofortification. And we were introduced by Professor Robin Graham, who's also in the picture from the University of Adelaide. So as mentioned, I first came to the Philippines in 1972, and I was a volunteer here for 3 years. And I had a plan, when I finished those first 3 years as a volunteer, I had a plan to come back and live and work in Asia for my career. And I got sidetracked at IFPRI in Washington, D.C., and 37 years later, I finally made it, and now I'm living here in Collegeville, in Los Baños, and very happy to be here. So I want to talk about the role of agriculture in improving nutrition. I know that when we first started with this idea of biofortification in the 1990s, most of the plant scientists I talked to said, well, my job is to improve yields. My job is to make sure plants have disease resistance, insect resistance. Nutrition's not my job. That's the job of nutritionists. And when I talked to nutritionists, they felt pretty much the same way. They said, okay, we solve when there's malnutrition, there are deficiencies of minerals and vitamins. Our job is to give supplements. Our job is to make sure the food is fortified, and we don't really interact with the agricultural sector in accomplishing our objectives. Well, those attitudes have changed quite a bit now, and I think biofortification has played a role in that. So this is the kind of dietary diversity that we want to see everybody eat. Probably everybody in this room can afford this type of diet, but the poor around the world, a lot of them cannot afford this type of dietary diversity, and I want to talk a little bit about what's been happening in the agricultural sector to explain why. So this is my diagram of the Green Revolution, and that red dashed line across the middle is 100% increase, and that's from 1965 to 1999. And you can see this blue bar here. That's population. Population doubled, 100% increase during that period. And policymakers knew that was coming, and they were very worried there would be widespread famines, because when you double the population, you double the need for cereals in the world. So IRRI was started here in Los Baños. CIMMYT worked on high-yielding varieties of wheat and maize, and we had the Green Revolution. And the big success of the Green Revolution is represented by the orange bars. And you can see that production more than doubled during the period. So we didn't have widespread famine. We had enough energy, enough calories in the form of cereals to go around. But what I really want to draw your attention to are the green bars, and that shows what the increase in pulse production was. Now, pulses, that's just a marker for vegetables, for fruits, for animal products. The non-staple foods are the ones that are dense in minerals and vitamins, not the cereals, not the food staples. And if you're going to be healthy, you need to eat plenty of non-staple foods. But you see, we only had a 25% increase in pulses. And if I put bars up for vegetables and fruits and animal products, you'd still see this generally low bars, not even reaching 50%, because we didn't have the productivity increases, we didn't have the yield increases for the non-staple foods. Okay, so what does that mean What does that mean for food prices when you have that kind of situation? Well, this is, let's see. Okay, so when the non-staple foods, what happened, first of all, what happened with rice prices and wheat prices is that I don't have the slide in here, but rice prices and wheat prices actually fell by 40% because you had supply growing faster than demand. But what this graph shows is what happened to non-staple foods. And so you had a shortage of supply, you had a rapid increase in demand because growing population, growing incomes. And you can see here, these are data for India. So over the past 45 years, you can see a steady increase in the vegetable prices, and the food prices, and the pulse prices, animal product prices. So what that means for the poor is that their incomes haven't gone up. It becomes more and more difficult to afford dietary quality. So this is the underlying reason why you have widespread deficiencies of mineral and vitamins. So this next slide shows some typical dietary patterns. And I see this pattern all over the world when I look at data sets for Africa, for Asia, for Latin America. So let me take a little bit of time to show you what the patterns are. The first thing to point out is the brown, is the food staples. This is energy intake from food staples. This is a graph of our rural areas in Bangladesh. This is a table for the Philippines for the whole population, for the Food and Nutrition Research Institute surveys. The first is that you can see that the consumption doesn't change from low income to high income. So in Bangladesh, the poorer people and the richer people eat the same amount of rice. It's the same in the Philippines. You see the food staples, it's mostly rice, there's some corn, there's some wheat in there. But when you add it all up, even the higher income group eats a little bit less. So what do people do when they have some income? The first thing they do is they buy the food staple to keep from going hungry. And then when they get enough of the food staple, then they start buying other things because they have some income left over. If you're poor, you don't have much income left over. If you're richer, you have a lot of income left over. So the first thing you do is you buy the non-staple plant foods. You buy some, and then as your income goes up, you buy more. So this is about a 50% increase. And again, you see another increase in the Philippines with it going up. Okay. But what people really like to eat are the animal products, but they're the most expensive sources of energy. The cost per calorie is very high. In Bangladesh, this costs 20 times as much per calorie as rice does. So you see there's a doubling. The amount is quite low, but there's a doubling from low income to high income. And you see in the Philippines, there's a tripling from low income to high income of the meat products. So that's what people really want to eat. And those are the foods that are really highly dense and have highly bioavailable sources of vitamins and minerals. So even these people in Bangladesh are going to be deficient in a lot of minerals, vitamins and minerals. In the Philippines, these people are going to be quite deficient. Maybe some of these people in the upper income group are starting to be more adequate in their mineral and vitamin intake. So this is what's been happening in agriculture, and this is what diets look like all over the world. And this is why 2 billion people, primarily mothers and children, are subject to mineral and vitamin deficiencies. So these are some of the consequences, the functional outcomes, things that happen to you when you're deficient. So the nutritionists about 30 years ago undertook vitamin A capsule distribution trials, and they were astounded to find that when they gave preschool children one high-dose vitamin A supplement once every 6 months, they could, of all the deaths that occur among preschool children, they could save 1 out of 4 children. simply by giving them the vitamin A capsule. And they were quite amazed that that was such a high percentage. They had no idea really that vitamin A deficiency was such a severe public health problem. And that made them start looking at other minerals and vitamins. So iron deficiency, it's estimated that 2 billion, as I say, 2 billion people are subject to iron deficiency. And one of the things about iron deficiency is it's related to cognitive function. So children who suffer from iron deficiency when they're young, it lowers their cognitive abilities permanently. And they can't do as well in school, they can't think as well basically because of iron deficiency. It's related to your cognitive function. And zinc deficiency is also related to your immune system. If you're zinc deficient, you're more subject to severe bouts of diarrhea and pneumonia. And it's estimated that 450,000 deaths among preschool children each year can be attributed to zinc deficiency. So I don't have time to go into all the statistics. There's a lot of evidence on this. But this gives you a little bit of a feeling of, what a serious problem it is when people don't have dietary quality, when they cannot afford vegetables and fruits and animal products in their diets. And this is a visual presentation of just how cognitive function can be affected by lack of minerals and vitamins. So this comes from the Harvard Medical School, and it shows that often we talk about stunting. Children are stunted when they're malnourished. This is what doesn't show, is that when children are stunted, their brain development is severely affected. So I'm going to talk a lot about zinc deficiency because I'm going to talk about high zinc rice, which we're introducing into the Philippines. So what is the situation with zinc deficiency in the Philippines? Well, again, these are data from the Food and Nutrition Research Institute surveys. They do a nationwide survey once every 5 years. And you can see that on average, more than 20% of the population in the Philippines is zinc deficient. That classifies it as a serious public health problem. The light blue are from the 2008 survey, and the darker blue are from the 2013 survey. So it's good. The good news is that it's improving. Zinc deficiency is improving over time between 2008 and 2013. We're still waiting for the results, I think, of the 2018 survey. But even though things are getting better, they're still above 20%, which is a serious problem. So zinc deficiency, it harms physical growth and brain development. It lowers immunity, and it increases, as I've already said, it increases the risks of diarrhea and respiratory infections. Now, I think this slide, 33% of Philippine children are stunted, which is quite a high percentage, especially given the level of economic development of the Philippines. And so there's a lot of focus now on reducing stunting, and there are a lot of programs in place and people are monitoring the stunting rate. But zinc deficiency is associated with stunting. And so doing something about zinc deficiency should help to lower stunting in the Philippines. So that's this slide sort of summarizes everything that I've just said about the role that agriculture should be playing in providing nutrition for the Philippines, for all countries really. If you think of the area of this rectangle as all the nutrients that a population needs, the green represents what agriculture is currently providing out of the total requirements. What the nutrition community has done is they've come in to close the gap, with supplementation programs. So for example, there's a universal vitamin A supplementation program that's been implemented in the Philippines for decades and in many other countries. Now after 20 years, 20 billion, that's with a B, 20 billion vitamin A capsules have been given out. They've saved maybe 5 million lives of children. They're great programs, but it costs $1 per capsule when you count the manufacture of the capsule, but more importantly, the network of people and programs that you have to put in place. So 10 billion, did I say 20 billion? 10 billion capsules have been given out over the last 20 years at a cost of $10 billion. And it's not addressing the underlying problem, you're just treating the problem. You just have to keep, if you don't do anything differently, you're going to have to give another 10 billion capsules out in the next 20 years. So the vision is that when we move into the future, agriculture, and we have to implement programs in agriculture so that agriculture can provide a much higher percentage, because you're fixing the problem. It's much more cost effective to fix the problem than to keep treating the problem with something that doesn't fix the problem. You're always going to need supplementation and fortification programs, but they need to be reduced. Okay? So that's the background and that's the introduction for biofortification. Biofortification is one agricultural strategy that can be used to address these mineral and vitamin deficiencies. So this is the slide I use to explain in very simple terms what biofortification is all about. I can't use a picture of zinc rice because high zinc rice, when you look at the grains, you can't see the zinc, you can't taste the zinc. But this is, this orange maize is a biofortified maize. It's bred for Africa. It's very high in provitamin A. It's conventional breeding. It's not a GMO. I don't at all think GMOs are harmful. I hate the opposition to GMOs. But this is a conventionally bred maize. Because it's conventionally bred, there's no political opposition. They've already been released in Africa. They're being grown by farmers. They're being eaten by consumers. White maize is if rice is the main staple in Asia, maize is the main staple in Africa. White maize is widely eaten in Africa. Most of the maize is white. There's some yellow maize, but it's considered livestock feed. It actually doesn't have very much vitamin A in it. The white maize has 0 vitamin A. 45% of children, preschool children in Africa suffer from vitamin A deficiency. Now my hope and my vision is that we replace all the white maize with orange maize in Africa, say over the next 20 years. Now any given day that you switch from white maize to orange maize, provitamin A maize, you get an extra 40% of your vitamin A requirement. So if you're getting 60% of your vitamin A requirement from other foods in your diet, and you switch from white maize to orange maize, you go from 60% up to 100% of your vitamin A requirement. And this is a very important point, the orange maize costs exactly the same as the white maize. Now why does the orange maize cost the same? It's because it's just as high yielding as the white maize. It's very important that when we do our breeding, we not only add the extra minerals and vitamins, but we put it in high yielding backgrounds, because when it's in a high yielding background, it sells for the same price. If it were more expensive, the poor would always buy the white maize and they wouldn't eat the orange maize. So our value proposition to the mothers is buy and eat the orange maize and protect your family from vitamin A deficiency. It costs exactly the same amount of money. And it seems like a no-brainer, but what do the mothers say when we tell them that? They want to know how it tastes. So we do blind taste tests, and we show they actually can tell the difference. It tastes a little bit different, but it's sweeter. It's a little bit sweeter, and they actually like the taste. So once they taste, then they understand, and they switch, and they're able to eat it. So now our big job is how do we scale up the use of vitamin A maize. So that, in a nutshell, that's what biofortification is all about. Now let me turn to zinc once again, because again I'm going to talk about high zinc maize. And I happen to have the data for Bangladesh, but it's the same. You'll see it's exactly the same principle. Okay, these are the dietary patterns that I just showed you before for Bangladesh, but instead of showing where they get their calories from, this shows where they get their zinc from. Okay? So Bangladeshis eat a lot of rice, they eat a lot of rice, so they get about 6 milligrams a day of zinc from rice. And you can see these numbers are pretty constant across income group because they all eat the same amount of rice. Okay? What's the requirement for zinc each day on average? The requirement is 13 milligrams of zinc per day. Now they also get some zinc from non-staple plant foods, they also get some zinc from animal and fish products, but you know, you've seen that they eat small amounts of those foods, so they don't get as much zinc from those foods. So when you add it up, the poor get 8 milligrams of zinc, and the high get about 11 milligrams of zinc. Okay? Everybody, even the higher income group, is well below the requirement of 13. Zinc deficiency is very high in Bangladesh. Now, most rice has the density is 15 milligrams per kilogram of zinc. The biofortified varieties have 30 milligrams. Our target that we're shooting for is 30, and we know we're headed that way. And the breeding programs are now in Bangladesh are now starting to reach 30 milligrams of zinc. If you double the density of zinc, this is 30, you get to double all these numbers. If you replace all the regular rice with a high zinc rice, you get to double all these numbers, right? It goes from a density of 15 to a density of 30. You double the density. So now the intake from rice is 12, and it's 12.4, it's whatever, 12.9. You get to add 6 here also, 14, 15, 16. Everybody's above their zinc requirement. So it takes a while. You have to release a lot of high zinc rices. You have to replace all the rices in Bangladesh with high zinc varieties. You just get the rice breeders to piggyback high zinc on all the new varieties that they're developing. And you know that in 20, 25 years from now, the farmers will have already switched over to the better and better varieties that are coming out of the Bangladesh Rice Research Institute. And then after 20 years, you've solved the zinc deficiency problem. And all you've had to do is invest a marginal amount of money in your agricultural research. Okay, so that's the logic for Bangladesh, and it's exactly the same logic for the Philippines. So we've released 8 high zinc rice varieties in Bangladesh. We've only released 1 variety so far in the Philippines, but more are coming, and I'll talk about that. So I've already kind of alluded to why I like biofortification. I'm an economist by training. I like that the investment in agricultural research is much, much smaller than the investment in supplementation, in commercial fortification. It's basically a one-time investment to understand the science, do the basic breeding, and then you don't have the recurrent costs. A farmer growing a biofortified crop spends exactly the same amount of money as they do growing a non-biofortified crop. It's just as high yielding, it sells for the same price in the market. You hardly even see or feel when the rices are all replaced by high zinc. So it's very, you don't need a lot of behavior change. The behavior changes with the the rice breeders. And so it makes it a very cost-effective investment. So these are the crops that we've been working on in HarvestPlus. HarvestPlus started in 2003. So we have high zinc rice, we have high zinc wheat also, so these are the main crops for Asia. I've talked about high provitamin A maize. We also have high iron pearl millet, And this is for India, but also Africa. And we have high iron beans, which are mainly for Africa. And then we have the provitamin A cassava, the orange sweet potato, provitamin A. Those are the main crops. We also have done a little bit of work on bananas, sorghum, potatoes, cowpeas, and lentils. But the first 7 that I mentioned are the ones that we've invested most of our research in. And this is a map of the world. We've already released, this number's, I have to change the slide, this number's now above 300 varieties released across those 12 crops. They're now released in 35 countries around the world. In 4 or 5 years they'll be released in 60 countries. So all these countries that you see in either light green or dark green are those 60 countries. So it's a global program. Our vision is that in 20 or 30 years, most of the staple food crops eaten in developing countries will be biofortified. But we have a lot of breadth now, and now what we need is depth. We need to go from a very small percentage of the total supply in these countries to a very high percentage of the total supply. And it's a 20, 25, 30-year effort before that will happen, but it's worth it. It's really worth it. So we've really gotten the plant breeders, the plant breeding community on board. They're working with us. They've developed the crops and high-yielding backgrounds. Now, there was a lot of skepticism in the beginning with the nutrition community. They said, okay, 40% of the estimated average requirement, will it be bioavailable? Will it actually improve nutrition? And we've commissioned 14 efficacy trials. The first of the 14 efficacy trials was actually started back in 2002 here in Los Baños. But back then we had a high iron rise, so we did a high iron efficacy trial. And we've shown now that these crops improve vitamin A status, they improve iron status, they improve zinc status. But even more importantly, we've shown improved functional outcomes. The status, you take blood samples and you measure the iron in the blood, the vitamin A in the blood, the zinc in the blood. But we actually showed improved functional outcomes. So I've mentioned that iron is associated with cognition. We've fed to children and women, we've fed our high iron beans, our high iron pearl millet. That's the intervention group. The other groups eat, the control groups eat the regular pearl millet, the regular beans. And the ones that eat the biofortified high iron crops, they actually perform better on cognition tests. And their work performance, they have stronger work performance for the high iron. And we've shown reduced morbidity with the high zinc crops and with the high provitamin A crops. So this has all been published in the nutrition literature. So now the nutrition community is on board that we actually will have a public health impact if farmers will adopt these crops. So this is an example of efficacy trial with high zinc wheat that we undertook in India. We had mother-child pairs who ate the high zinc wheat, and we had mother-child pairs who ate the regular wheat. And you can see that here's the high zinc and here's the low zinc. The days, this is for the children, the days with pneumonia is lower for the high zinc wheat. The days with fever is lower for the high zinc wheat. It's statistically significant. I guess the pneumonia and the vomiting are statistically significant. So this is just a slide for the children. I haven't included the slide for the mothers. So that's kind of quickly going through the evidence that we have that it does improve mineral and vitamin status. Now let's talk about how we disseminate, how we get high rates of adoption. So in Bangladesh, we released our first varieties in 2013. We've gotten funding from donors. We've spent a little more actually than $10 million in Bangladesh now, multiplying seed, working with partners, working with NGOs, working with government agencies. We have demonstration plots where we make seeds, small packets of seed available to farmers. And they like the varieties, not because they're high in zinc, they like the varieties because, for example, one of our varieties is a short duration variety. And when they have short duration, they're able to fit in 3 crops in a year instead of 2 crops, and they're higher profit. So we estimate now that more than 1 million farm households in Bangladesh, through our efforts, are now growing and eating the high zinc wheat. And as I mentioned, 8 varieties have been released in Bangladesh. But I want to spend the remainder of the time kind of brainstorming and talking about what we can do in the Philippines. So this rice has been released in the Philippines. It's got this kind of technical name, N6 2016 RC460. I'm not a rice breeder, so I don't know what all that stands for. But it's been tested by the Varietal Release Committee here in the Philippines, and it's officially released. But it's not at all widely disseminated, and the reason for that is we don't have any funding so far to do the initial steps. There are just some basic things you need to do to promote a variety, to get farmers to start to adopt it and to start it really moving. And in the case of Bangladesh, we've been able to raise quite a bit of funding already. In the case of the Philippines, that's one of the things I'm doing now, is going around talking about it and seeing what kind of interest we can generate to get things started. So again, this is, we've used conventional breeding techniques, but the increment is only about 5 parts per million. We want the later varieties that are coming out, we'll get the increment up to plus 15 parts per million. Now these are some of the agronomic traits of this variety. So on average, in different sites where it's tested, its yield is 4.7 tons. It's higher in some locations, lower in other locations. Now its average yield is not quite up to what the highest yielding rices are, and this is a detriment in terms of our really promoting it and really trying to get a widespread adoption by farmers. This particular variety will never get widespread adoption because it does not equal the yield or outperform the yield. We have released a high zinc rice now in Indonesia that actually equals the yield of the most popular variety, but has better pest and disease resistance than the most popular variety in Indonesia. So we think that can really take off. So it has good pest and disease resistance. The consumer characteristics are quite acceptable. It's almost there, but the yield is, say, 95% of what we want it to be. So it's not unreasonable under certain circumstances to produce it and feed it in certain types of programs, because it is a healthier rice. People who eat the high zinc rice will get a health benefit from the high zinc rice. So again, we have 8 additional lines that are in the breeding pipelines. 6 of them are still at Erie, 2 of them are being tested for release in the Philippines by Phil Rice. Erie works closely with Phil Rice on the development and the release of the varieties, but of course it's Phil Rice that has the responsibility for the release. And our hope is that these next 2 varieties coming out will meet the yield standards that we want to see for all the high zinc rices. And we also know that the increment in the zinc will be more than 5 parts per million, hopefully 8 to 10 parts per million. And then the third wave of varieties will start to approach 15 parts per million. So this is a slide from Erie, and it shows it basically shows the variation that you can get in the zinc in the rice grain. And you can see the averages are somewhere around 15, 16, 17 in these diagrams. But the important point is that you have some rices that are up around 30 parts per million zinc. I'm sure some of you are better scientists and rice breeders than I am, but these varieties out here will have the genes that translocate the zinc into the rice grain. And in fact, they may have maybe a high percentage of all the genes involved, but they may not have all the genes involved. So you may be able to take some genes from these varieties here and make sure you put all the genes that convey high zinc into new varieties that don't yet exist, and then you'll actually be able to get varieties that are even higher, maybe a little bit higher than 30 parts per million zinc. So what's the way forward? How do we get dissemination in the Philippines? Well, these are some of examples of some of the programs that exist for better nutrition in the Philippines. Some of them are school feeding programs, other types of programs, but they involve giving subsidized food, better quality diets. There are budgets available for making better quality diets available. And so the idea would be that we could take this high zinc rice in the Philippines and use that rice as the rice component of these subsidy programs. And in that way we would improve the zinc status of the people eating those rices. The high zinc rice is high yielding. The price might be 5%, 10% more expensive than any normal rice that you buy in the market, but that extra margin would be worth it in terms of the people would be healthier because they'd be eating the high zinc rice. So these are just some of the examples. You might have school meal programs. The local government units might have feeding programs. The NGOs, the civil society organizations. And then the government just has certain programs. They run hospitals, they run prisons. They provide meals for the people in these institutions, and the government could use the high zinc rice instead of regular rice in their programs. Now, in the long term, we really depend on even better varieties coming out. The long term, we want to see all the varieties of rice being high in zinc. Erie has now begun a program where all of their germplasm is being converted to high zinc. So everything it will take several years to accomplish this, but they have the funding now. They've started with the funding, they've started with the research to convert over all their germplasm to having this trait of being high in zinc. You know that all of their germplasm has the short stature. It's always had this short stature since the 1960s. That's just a permanent thing. And after, say, 10 years from now, everything coming out of Erie will also be high in zinc, because now we have the tools and we have the money to undertake the research to do that. I'll just mention that we're working, we have a small program, a small effort with some scientists at UPLB and also at the Institute of Plant Breeding. We've brought in high provitamin A sweet potato is already available in the Philippines from the International Potato Center efforts. They're also available at the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction. We're growing orange sweet potato in our backyard here in Los Baños, so it's available. It's just not, obviously sweet potato is not as widely eaten as rice, so you're never going to have as high an impact with these crops. We've brought in provitamin A maize seeds from Nigeria, from Africa, and they're being tested now to see how the yields perform here in Los Baños. Provitamin A cassava has been available from Latin America, and there are also provitamin A bananas that are available. But there's some problems with viruses with cassava, with bananas here in the Philippines, so that's going to be a longer term effort. So I think that, I think we'll just, I'll wrap it up here. Let me just put in a plug for another hat that I wear is that I'm the chair of the board of an organization called Micronutrient Forum. We're holding a global conference in Bangkok next March, and it brings together all the different researchers and organizations working on mineral and vitamin deficiencies around the world. So I hope that some of you would be interested in attending and submitting abstracts for presentation. So I think I've taken too long, but we can open it up for discussion now.